Last 2 months of his life, Dr. King faced the idea that civil rights alone could not solve the problem of poverty. He roamed the South, trying to gain support for Poor People's Campaign. Its goals: full employment, a guaranteed income, and decent housing for every American.
The campaign would recruit among all races, bring them to Washington, force the government to respond, a nonviolent army of the poor.
All working together to solve the problem of poverty. We're tired of working full-time jobs for part-time income, and we are tired of not being able to find work. And it didn't cost the nation 1 penny to integrate lunch counters. It didn't cost the nation 1 penny to guarantee the right to vote. Now we are dealing with issues that cannot be solved without the nation spending billions of dollars and undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power. If our nation can spend $35 billion a year to fight an unjust, evil war in Vietnam and $20 billion to put a man on the moon, it can spend billions of dollars to put God's children on their own 2 feet right here on earth. This is a reality. Now, when we come to Washington, we are coming to get our check. Very frankly, this is a search for an alternative to riot. The riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty and the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists. We are demanding an emergency program to provide employment for everyone in need of a job. Or, if a work program is impractical, a guaranteed annual income at levels that sustain life in decent circumstances. This is a new beginning on the economic front.
The Poor People's Campaign was about economics. Hey, what happened to that whole movement? It's almost as if it wasn't. It disappeared.
Wait a minute. It didn't disappear. You might forget Martin Luther King was assassinated in April. The Poor People's Campaign was supposed to go to Washington in April. So the organization that mobilized it was essentially decapitated and thrown into chaos about 3 weeks before it was supposed to happen.
You know, that's really why they killed him, was when he started to have an economic message. And you heard him say it on the video that it didn't cost you a penny to integrate the lunch counter or give us the right to vote, but it's going to cost you billions to make sure we're whole economically. And, you know, they wrote about this in The Intercept. They called it the Santa Clausification of Dr. King, is what we do to him. We pretend, because all we do is focus on his civil rights work. They forgot that he had the Poor People's Campaign. And he was going to march on Washington to demand jobs and an economic life. So this is what this is going to say, because that's really what he got unpopular, when he went against the war machine and he started talking about economic equality. Many in the civil rights community warned King to focus on black civil rights and ignore the war so as not to alienate the Democratic Party. He gave a speech at the Riverside Church in New York City where he called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world and denounced napalm bombings and the propping up of a puppet government in South Vietnam. He also called for a total re-examination of U.S. foreign policy, questioning capitalist exploitation of the developing world. Wow, things have really changed, huh, Ron? In 1966, he told staff at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that there must be a better distribution of wealth and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism.
The FBI, notoriously headed by J. Edgar Hoover.
Each of the special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation must be ready and capable to meet any challenge.
In his eyes, King was a threat to the status quo.
Civil rights leader Martin Luther King leads the procession to the United Nations, where he urges UN pressure to force the U.S. to stop bombing North Vietnam.
The bombing in Vietnam has to stop. As has been proved time and again by all Air Force studies, bombing simply increases the resistance of people to come to the negotiating table. This was true in Korea, it was true in Germany. We are achieving nothing in North Vietnam by the bomb.
Johnson had no intentions of defunding the military-industrial complex. He wanted the opposite, to expand their presence in Vietnam.
In the basement of Washington's Masonic Temple is a shrine that is closed to the public. It's a memorial to one of America's most powerful men, J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI and a close friend of President Lyndon Johnson.
But I didn't want this opportunity to go by without telling you again how proud I am of you and how glad I am that Uncle Sam's got you working for us. And if you just think that you're going to get off the payroll because you're getting a little older, you're crazy as hell. I don't retire the FBI.
This is the story of how Hoover tried in secret to prevent equal rights for blacks. Hoover's plot took place in a twilight world away from the cameras, so we have used actors to illustrate many of the scenes in this film. But what was recorded at the time were telephone calls between President Johnson and key players in the drama. These are the calls you will hear in the film. Hoover was a white supremacist at the head of a white FBI. To him, black civil rights leaders were left-wing agitators, probably in the pay of the Kremlin.
In the eyes of their Soviet comrades, the communists in this country have a vital role in the march toward world enslavement. They are, by Nikita Khrushchev's own description, a valuable arm of the international conspiracy against God and freedom. And the sooner every American faces this fact, the stronger our position will be. We must shed our complacency and aggressively meet this challenge.
Under Hoover, the FBI had become a political police force, using bugging, telephone tapping, burglary, and forgery, all in the name of internal security. In August 1963, Hoover had set up a special unit to watch Martin Luther King. It reported that the American Communist Party had planted 2 senior and secret members in Dr. King's entourage, where they had become close advisors. One was a Jewish lawyer named Stanley Levison. The other was a former young socialist, Clarence Jones. The watch on King was codenamed Operation Zorro. An assistant director, William Sullivan, was put in charge of Hoover's special unit. A 9-hour meeting produced an expanded action plan. It ranged from the use of hidden microphones in hotel rooms used by King to the planting of prostitutes in his offices as secretaries. There was no discussion of contacts with communists, a field of inquiry the FBI had quickly abandoned as unrewarding. Instead, they decided to focus on King's private life, in the hope, and this is a quote from the record, of exposing King as an immoral opportunist. Arthur Murtagh, then a field agent in the FBI's Atlanta office, was a member of the team.
Hoover wanted it done. I don't think there was any justification of it at all. There wasn't anything. We had no information that King was in any way un-American or in violation of the law. The Bureau was interested in destroying him because Hoover wanted him destroyed. They started off hating him because he was black. He was I hate to use the phrase, but he was a nigger. The agents that I was working with on this particular squad had been brought up to believe that all black people were dangerous, that they were dishonest, that they lacked character, that they were sexual perverts, all kinds of hatred.
All of the forces of hell, all of the black mobs, King and his black revolutionaries, the entire communist conspiracy is concentrating on St. Augustine. I don't think that the Civil Rights Bill settles anything. All that the Civil Rights Bill does is to start a race war in the United States.
Murtagh says it was the most extensive surveillance operation ever undertaken by the FBI. In one room, agents recorded all telephone calls to and from King's offices and his home on nearby Johnson Street. In another room, again according to Murtagh, Hoover's G-men busied themselves by dreaming up imaginative schemes for the entrapment of the Reverend King. For 17 hours, agents recorded conversations between King and several colleagues and visitors, 2 of whom were women. Clarence Jones, who was there, does not deny that King had sex during his stay. He blames King for falling into an FBI trap. Armed with a permit called a trash recovery order, signed by the chief himself, the agents now delved into dustbins outside King's Atlanta headquarters. They were looking for a sample of the handwriting of Andrew Young, the movement's personable office manager. Then the forgers went to work.
They took the handwriting, duplicated it, wrote all kinds of messages to Mrs. King, trying to make it appear that people who were very close in his own personal circle were involved sexually with his wife, trying to get warfare going between the players in the King camp.
Compared with what was to come, those were merely dirty tricks. The news now broke that Martin Luther King had won the world's most prestigious honor, the Nobel Peace Prize. That drove Hoover into a frenzy. The FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division now prepared a book entitled Martin Luther King Jr., His Personal Conduct. A copy was sent to Bill Moyers, the President's Deputy Chief of Staff, with a letter asking permission to send the book to members of the Cabinet. Moyers agreed. Copies were sent to the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, to Robert McNamara at the Pentagon, and to John McCone, the Director of the CIA. But Hoover wanted to share his files on King with the public. He ordered his staff to use their contacts in the press to get the story out. One such contact was the chief Washington correspondent of the Los Angeles Times, David Krasno.
He told me that Dr. King was a notorious womanizer, and that he'd had a number of sexual escapades, and that the Bureau had proof of this. And he said, well, let me read you a portion of one of these tapes. It was despicable. It's none of their business.
No reporter would touch the story. Hoover now returned to his attack on Dr. King. He invited 2 women reporters to his office for a background chat. He talked about the need for moral purity in public life, and then, stressing that his next remark was on the record, he called Dr. King the most notorious liar in the country. The remark appeared in print. When the news magazines picked up the story, at least one civil rights leader called for Hoover's resignation. King himself mildly protested that the FBI chief must be suffering from overwork. But on the telephone to a friend, King called Hoover senile. And when the FBI monitors put that in their logs, Hoover went public again in a barely coded speech in Chicago.
When man places himself above the law, he aids the communists' relentless effort to destroy the ideals of our civilization. The man who has no objective values by which he judges his actions, who allows his passions to run wild, unchecked by a moral standard of what is right, that man is surely risking the loss of his immortal soul.
Assistant Director Sullivan took his favorite tapes to the FBI's audio labs, where senior technician John Matter transferred the most incriminating parts to a single reel. The third agent, Lish Whitson, flew with the tape to Miami Beach and posted it from there to the King family home in Atlanta, together with an anonymous letter. FBI agents in Atlanta listened in to make sure the package had arrived safely. Years later, a handwritten copy of that note was found in William Sullivan's desk at the FBI.
The letter began by calling Dr. King a fraud and warned that the demise of his reputation among the public was fast approaching. The package also contained an audio tape, a compilation of FBI surveillance allegedly of King engaging in multiple extramarital affairs. The document's ominous closing, according to some scholars, suggested that Dr. King was given a deadline of 34 days to take his own life, or suffer the humiliation of the tape's release.
The interpretation of this by the people that investigated the FBI later, and by just about everybody who has gone through these records, believes that they intended for him to commit suicide.
The FBI sent the package anonymously to Dr. King on November 21st, 1964. But it went unopened for over a month because King was in Oslo, Norway, accepting the Nobel Prize.
The first person to eventually open Sullivan's threatening package long after Christmas is Mrs. King. King and his associates, when they listen to the tape after reading the threatening letter, have no doubt whatsoever that this is from the FBI. King goes into a very deep depression. And of course, the FBI, which is still wiretapping his phones, knows about the discovery of the package and the emotional impact it has on King.
It seemed that Hoover and the FBI's efforts to neutralize Dr. King were a failure, and their investigation stalled.
April 4th, 6:10 p.m. Witnesses claim to see a man fleeing a rooming house. The search for a white Mustang begins. 6:30 p.m. Police discover an abandoned package. Inside, the alleged murder weapon. 7:05 p.m. Dr. Martin Luther King is pronounced dead at St. Joseph's Hospital. 8:15 p.m. The bundle found at the scene is handed over to the FBI. Investigations begin to point to one man using several aliases to commit the crime. Identification from fingerprints on the rifle and binoculars left in a package at the scene link the assassination to a man called James Earl Ray. April 19th, FBI issue a wanted poster. Over 2 months since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. June 8th, London, United Kingdom. At the time of his arrest, Ray was attempting to fly to Rhodesia via Belgium on a fake passport. Standing before a Memphis judge in March 1969, James Earl Ray entered an Alford plea with the sole aim of avoiding the electric chair, a reasonable framework to use for someone who suspects they're being framed and had no finances to mount a defense. 2 days on, Ray unsuccessfully attempts to backtrack on his decision, claiming his innocence, sowing the seeds of conspiracy for decades to come. According to Ray, he was set up by a mysterious blonde Cuban man, known only as Raul, claiming he was a patsy in a wider conspiracy. The unidentified man recruited James in Montreal, 1967, as a drug and gun runner, explaining his erratic movements and use of aliases across the continent. Raul had given him money to purchase the white Mustang, instructed him to purchase the rifle, which was later found at the scene, and to be at that location, indicating a conspiracy was afoot. Until his dying day, he protested his innocence. Was he telling the truth? The official account. James Earl Ray, filled with racial hatred for King, rented a room on the second floor of the rooming house and perched in a bathtub. He peeked out of the window overlooking the Lorraine Motel, and at 6:01 p.m., he pulled the trigger that ended the life of one of America's most influential visionaries. Furthermore, he required split-second timing to drop the bundle by the door of a nearby shop and escape before the first officer was on the scene, 2 minutes later. Unable to dispute his racial motives, many have questioned the capability of Ray to organize, carry out, and escape without partners in crime.
So you heard the news on the radio? Is that the way you heard it? So you were driving, you left that gas station at 2nd and Linden, what, about 6 or?
I don't have any way of knowing. I think it's around that time, but I don't even know if it's Linden. I know the approximate area it is. I've seen the map on the Inquirer.
And you were going back to pick up this man that you say is Raul, is it?
No, I just waiting the car back.
So you heard all this confusion, flipped on the radio, they said Dr. King's been shot. Did you think you were set up at that point?
Oh, no, I was headed toward New Orleans when I had the radio on. I used to keep the radio on. I think I have too strong feelings about the shooting.
With the trial only lasting 2.5 hours, suspicions were raised at its immediacy, and the coercion of his lawyer to force through a guilty plea, the reason of which would provide perfect cover for any co-conspirators. Feeling betrayed from what he thought was the leaking of case material, Ray hired the forceful lawyer and longtime close friend to President Lyndon Johnson, Percy Foreman. Percy Foreman, the same lawyer who represented Jack Ruby, the man at the center of the Kennedy conspiracy, had turned up mysteriously at the opportune moment as Ray was firing his attorneys. Instead of having a lawyer who was in the process of mounting a strong defense, which might have succeeded, he was now in the hands of what some believed to be the conspirators of a cover-up. Although all hearsay, Hunt, an alleged co-conspirator of Kennedy's assassination, along with Johnson and Hoover, had sent his assistant to Percy Foreman's office with $125,000. Laying the loaded briefcase in front of him, Currington said, "I have 125,000 reasons James Earl Ray should plead guilty to killing King." The bribery can only be motivated by the clear and simple inside knowledge of Hoover and Johnson, knowledge that the case against James Earl Ray was insufficient to put him behind bars. No ballistic evidence linking the bullet with the rifle mysteriously found at the entrance of a storefront along with his belongings, unreliable witnesses and conflicting testimonies, even potentially weak evidence that placed Ray on the scene. If true, the bribe, along with threats to charge his brother as a co-conspirator, worked. The case never received the spotlight it needed. In displaying the same humility as his father, Dexter King, supported by the wider family, believed Ray's claims. Although he may be involved, Ray was not the shooter, pointing to the alleged murder weapon left at the scene as validation for their argument. Who in their right mind would leave a mountain of evidence against them at the murder scene? Further suspicions were raised when FBI investigators made no ballistic investigation, linking the bullet to the rifle, falsely claiming the bullet was too destroyed to be examined. Witness reports from the scene of the crime highlighted inaccuracies in the state's sequence of events. Solomon Jones, a volunteer who often drove King around town when he was in Memphis, saw a hooded person in the thicket across the street. He reported his sighting. By 7 a.m. the next morning, the bushes were removed. The crime scene had been destroyed. Information from that day has since been shown to be unreliable. The initial sighting of alleged perpetrator Ray, escaping in the white Mustang, was identified by a heavily intoxicated individual. in turn contradicting the several sober witnesses who claim to have seen the shooter jump down from the wall opposite the Lorraine Motel. Theories devised since that day heavily implicate the Memphis police as having a role in the assassination. Whether or not they had a part to play, strange occurrences surrounding that short window of time indicate a cover-up.
Those who were removed from the scene, who were security. There's some statements here that I really question. Of course, we will be questioning when we move into this area.
Drawing comparisons with the Kennedy assassination, when the military protection unit were mysteriously told they weren't needed. Orders that can only come from deep inside the Secret Services forcefully removed a black officer by the name of Detective Reddit from the vantage point overlooking the motel. A falsified assassination report, which could have only originated from inside the agency, claimed a contract had been released on his life. While he was escorted off the scene to safety, the assassination took place. In Memphis, links between the police and the FBI were strong. Fire and Police Chief Holloman, the man with control of the scene, had worked under FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover for over 7 years, going on to run the Memphis FBI unit in the early 60s. The FBI had a close eye on Dr. King that night. Omitted from the reports, but seen on celluloid, Merrill McCullough, first to respond, checks his pulse. Posing as a member of the local Invaders, a younger, more militant Memphis civil rights group, McCullough, also known as Agent 500, was a police informant whose intelligence led straight back to the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. 6:35 p.m. One oddity involving a second white Mustang obscured the truth even more. 6:35 p.m. 30 minutes after the shooting, a chase involving a white Mustang being pursued at speeds over 90 miles an hour is broadcast over CD radio.
Second Street 98. Bandit car just ahead of us, going north. 30 miles from your present position. K.
Okay, number 3.
Police waiting to intercept the chase never hear or see the vehicles, leading many to conclude the possibility of a hoax or diversion. There never was a chase. Contrary to the law, the police dispatcher failed to identify himself and hasn't been tracked down since. The squadron of police interceptors had been duped by the mysterious broadcaster and sent on a wild goose chase, giving the assassin time to escape. December 16, 1993, Pepper's determination to keep fighting the case was not in vain. Going against advice from his lawyers, Jowers revealed his role in the alleged plan to end King's life, live on Primetime Live, the magnitude of which paints a disturbing reality.
Did James Earl Ray kill Dr. Martin Luther King? No, he did not. Do you know who killed Dr. King?
I know who was paid to do it.
Was there a conspiracy involving more than one person?
There was a conspiracy, yes, sir. Sure was.
Were you involved in this conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King Jr.?
I was involved in it indirectly.
Coming to the end of his life, 73-year-old Jowers, a restaurant owner across the road from the Lorraine Motel, confessed to his involvement in the conspiracy, implicating a strong alliance and collusion between public servants and the criminal underworld. Frank Liberto, a mafia-connected produce dealer associated with Louisiana crime boss Carlos Marcello, delivered $100,000 to Jim's Grill, the back door of which opened onto the thick bushes, where several witnesses claimed the shots originated. In addition to the money, Jowers claims a man named Raul came to see him, delivering a rifle in a case. Witness testimony close to Liberto adds credibility to his involvement. Jowers insists he was also told there would be a cover, a decoy. Was Ray the fall guy? In court, Jowers named Memphis Police Department officer Lieutenant Earl Clark as the person he'd hired. Diligent researcher Dr. William Pepper, through years of interviews, following leads and partly funding the case himself to the tune of $1 million, disputed his claim somewhat. He deduced who the real shooter was. Clark was just the spotter. Pepper points the finger solely at Strausser, the Memphis Police Department's sharpest shooter. According to Pepper, Lenny Curtis, a janitor at the local firing range, claims to have seen Strausser practicing hours on end with a rifle that had been brought in by a member of the fire department. Further evidence mounted against Strausser. Frank's unusually large shoe size of 13 fitted the plaster of Paris mold made from the bushes where the alleged shot rang out, planting him firmly at the scene of the crime. One casualty of the assassination, often glossed over, is the mysterious murder of cab driver Buddy Butler, witness to a man running away from the scene and jumping into a police car. Buddy was interviewed that night. The following morning, he lay at the bottom of the Memphis-Arkansas Bridge. Reports later corroborated the figure to be Memphis Police Department officer Lieutenant Earl Clark. Both officers could be placed where the shots presumably originated from. Upon inspecting an abandoned white Mustang with Georgia plates, young FBI agent Don Wilson examined a torn-out piece from a telephone directory. Written was Raul, the initial J, and a telephone number, linked to a Las Vegas nightclub, owned by none other than Jack Ruby.
Oswald walks his last mile. His assailant moves in from the right.
There is Lee. He's been shot. He's been shot. The Oswald has been shot.
Now, from another camera, the motion is slowed. The murderer moves in, and here is the shame of all America as Jack Rubenstein takes the law unto himself.
Fearing it would be locked away or destroyed, Wilson held on to the information for 29 years. The historic 3.5-week trial never received the publicity that was warranted. The jury found that the mafia and various government agencies were deeply involved in the assassination. Mr. Ray was set up to take the blame. Was Ray's return to Atlanta a strange coincidence, or was he looking for his paycheck? The Godfather, Carlos Marcello, known most notably as an alleged co-mastermind of the Kennedy assassination, brokered the two contracts. One shooter, one spotter. His rumored involvement in the assassination plot and cozy ties to Johnson and Hoover provide serious motive to restrict the free flow of information. Over the decades, concerted efforts of withholding information has suppressed the truth.